I feel like you have to have these really strong opinions, but incredibly loosely held, because every 3-6 months, the actual fact pattern changes. You got to just be constantly trying things out. And the thing you tried out 3 months ago that totally failed, actually, a new set of models might work.
Hi, welcome to Season 2 of Neural Compass. I'm Mark Jacobstein, your host, and I am really excited today to have Jacob Effron, who's a managing director at Redpoint here, where he leads growth stage investing in AI and enterprise software and healthcare. Jacob is, among many other things, a podcaster and a blogger. Hopefully you find his stuff. And he brings a rare blend of operator and investor experience. So he started his career at McKinsey, ran product at Flatiron Health, which we're going to talk about a little bit. Has a BA from Yale and an MBA from Wharton, but we won't hold that against him. And really excited to have you here today, Jacob.
Really excited to be on. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Excited to chat.
Fantastic. So maybe let's just start with the journey. So how'd you get here? It's not necessarily the normal career path post McKinsey, and love to hear about the Flatiron experience as well, and maybe how that led you to venture.
Yeah, no, I definitely had a more meandering path than some of my colleagues that kind of went straight in from banking. But after McKinsey, I actually ended up moving to Tanzania and working for an off-grid solar company. It was kind of that was the first startup experience I had. It was a social enterprise selling small systems, 3 lights, a phone charger, and a radio. And I kind of fell in love with tech and the ability, the impact that tech could have. And so when it came time to come home and be a little bit closer, Flatiron was just this incredible company, right? That married, the mission. Hard not to get inspired about the mission of improving outcomes in the cancer space. I think everyone's family has personal experience with that, and then just an incredible team and business model and vision. And
maybe for our listeners who aren't familiar with Flatiron, do you want to describe a little bit what the product was and what the mission was?
Yeah. So the goal of Flatiron was basically to learn from the experience of every patient and, ultimately improve treatments based on gathering what was called real world data, or like the actual outcomes of patients. Obviously today, a lot of medical discoveries are done through clinical trials, which is, a small and, somewhat skewed subset of the population. And, we learn a lot from those studies, but then a lot of patients get these drugs in the real world and they have all sorts of different experiences. And there's basically just a ton you can learn from that. But up until Flatiron's time, there wasn't a ton of that data being used to inform, regulatory decisions, research. And so I think Flatiron was this 2-part business. The first was working really closely with community oncology centers, so clinics outside of the hospital, and providing tooling for them that helped them run their practices better. And then the second part of the business was working closely with pharma companies and researchers to take the data that lived in the software that Flatiron provided and in a de-identified way, help kind of generate insights from that. Just a really cool, very, very powerful healthcare business. And in retrospect, I think I realized it at the time, but now I really realize that the talent that Nat and Zach assembled there was just incredible. I mean, the quality of people I got to work with was
I think that the Flatiron Alumni Network has gone on to do lots of great things, and Zach and Nat themselves, in addition to the Flatiron work, some very cool stuff post Flatiron. And I think you see that with the best technology companies as the alumni networks sort of live long and prosper, as it were.
Yeah, I think that ability to kind of marry a really good tech team and really good technology with like an actual, smart go-to-market in the healthcare space. There were a few companies around that time in New York, Oscar, Flatiron, Rowe, and it's been amazing to see the alumni of those companies, found their own really cool companies.
Well, as an OG Silicon Alley person, I'm always happy to see New York companies succeed too. I've been out in the Bay Area for 22 years now, but I have a soft part in my heart here for great New York tech companies. One of the things actually that was really interesting about Flatiron was, I think, the appreciation for the value for real world data and real world evidence before everybody else. And I think it led to a very intelligent decision, which was to go acquire Altos's Onco EMR. So this was like sort of what launched the business, right? It was like you go buy the EMR that is embedded in most of the community oncology practices, and it allows you to both impact the way medicine is practiced and maybe implement decision support, but also have access to this, what I think of as like phase 4 data, right? You have your phase 1, 2, and 3s for your clinical trials. And then what happens in the real world is phase 4. We haven't seen as much innovation, I don't think, in the real world evidence and real world data space as I'd like. But I'm curious, as an investor now, have you seen other RWE companies that you found interesting, or other health data acquisition plays?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think after Flatiron, there was a few companies in different domains that went after real world evidence. There was a company called Verana that was trying to do this in like ophthalmology and cardiology and other spaces. There was a company called Concert Health that was like doing this in partnership with like the main academic organizations in oncology. One called All Stripes, which was doing this in rare disease. So I think a bunch of people have tried some of these models. Obviously there's different things that make data valuable, and both the freshness of that data, but also how quickly are things changing in that space. I think oncology is actually a really good fit for real world evidence because on a year-to-year basis, treatments change so much that you really do need that kind of like updated view. There's other specialties where sadly things don't change as quickly. And so having that snapshot from, 2-3 years ago is actually, practices relatively similar today. And so I think post Flatiron, there was a lot of like hype around real world data sets. And I think they're actually really hard to turn into businesses. I mean, look at 23andMe as a fascinating one, right? Where like it felt like that should be a really interesting data set that they never quite figured out exactly what to do with. And so I'm sure we'll have like, especially as AI models get better, more and more interesting data sets to work with. But I actually think it's been a challenging space post.
I agree. It's funny because the devil's in the details on this stuff. And of course, with 23andMe, what was interesting to me always was that the most valuable data asset they seemed to have was not actually the SNP array with the sort of few SNVs that they might find in people, but rather what they had was a huge database of consumers who had self-identified as interested in research and who had phenotyped themselves. Like they told you that they had Parkinson's or that they had Parkinson's in the family and that they were interested in research, and that the most valuable asset was that if you wanted to spin up a clinical trial, 23andMe could help you reach people really quickly, as opposed to like the deep omics. I'm still waiting for the like, I don't have a good answer to this. Given that whole genome sequencing is now like $100 and that there is immense value to both an individual and to the health ecosystem for sort of everyone to get genotyped and then cross it with the phenotypic information they have and like their disease history and all the rest of it. I'm still waiting for somebody to like figure out exactly how to sort of make that happen, because I think we'd find lots of amazing stuff, polygenic stuff and whatever else.
I mean, it seems like today there's like, not quite a business model yet there for it. And so I think you have companies like Tempus, which have really cleverly like stitched together a first act that like is a good business and then have that as like the kind of the juice of the future of where the company could go. But I feel like today, if you were to do that, it would have to either be like state subsidized or sponsored or on the back of a first act business that is, I'm not sure yet that people know enough what to do with that data and would pay for that data in a way that could make it a standalone business. But hopefully the fun thing about venture is these rules are meant to be broken.
It's funny because there's a lot of data that's almost good enough. We used to think about this at Garden. When I was at Garden Health, we had hundreds of thousands of people who we had genotyped who had cancer, and we had a complete snapshot of not only their sort of germline DNA, but more interestingly, the DNA that was being thrown off by their tumors, both the primary and the mets and all the rest of it. And there's real value there. But as it turns out, like a lot of what you want to understand, you can't find just from the DNA. You need the RNA, you need the proteome, you need understand spatial. Like biology is so complex. So speaking of biology being so complex, I mean, you now have an investor hat, which that you wear at Redpoint, and I'm curious, like how you think about health tech and biotech relative to some of the other investments that you make. And so maybe start with like core theses that you have as an investor looking at early stage stuff at Redpoint.
Yeah. And so, I spent a lot of time across a bunch of our AI investing in a bunch of different spaces. And I think what we generally look for on the AI side, I mean, obviously we invest across models, infrastructure, and applications, a little less on the hardware side. In the models world, it feels like the there was a period where it looked like there might be domain-specific LLMs, but honestly, it feels like the general improvement of models and kind of the general bitter lesson just lead us to a convergence on the same LLMs for language use cases. Now, obviously, biology is a really interesting domain insofar as there's just not an internet of data to go scrape.
Right.
And so I think we've spent a lot of time looking at some of the biology foundation models, and obviously, folks have pretty interesting data acquisition strategies there. And in many ways, as an investor now, biology is, maybe plus material sciences, plus robotics are some of the only areas you can invest in unless you want to put more money into OpenAI and Anthropic on the model side. So I think quite interesting. I'll maybe skip the infrastructure layer for now because that's more horizontal. But on the application side, we're really curious and looking for kind of businesses that have a few attributes. One is a really compelling wedge. I mean, they always joke, product market fit when you see it, but the scale at which some of these things are growing now, I think makes it clear when you have something that is truly 10x transformative with AI versus like a nice to have 20, 30%. And then, I think from that wedge, you want to feel like, hey, there's a tremendous amount on top of that you can go build. And there's like 40, 50 years of product to go build, not just like, hey, I found this wedge and I'll scale it to $100 million. And then I don't really know what to go build next, which, may end up playing out in some spaces. And then I think we want to see a path to like defensibility in some of these businesses, but obviously, everyone likes there to be moats. And in a 12-month-old business, I think it's probably pretty unrealistic to see some of that stuff. And so I think a belief that there's a path to that plus the other two. The irony of the whole thing is, healthcare has actually really been the leading vertical of AI adoption so far. I mean, I think, if I were to say the 4 spaces that have product market fit in AI today, it's coding, customer support, healthcare, and legal. But healthcare, I mean, coding's the killer one, and that's horizontal. Healthcare has got more AI revenue than customer support does, and than legal today. And so I actually think, in large part driven by the fact that scribes are just such a good wedge product in the healthcare world. But there's also a bunch of stuff happening in voice and back office automation. It's kind of breaking all the rules. Usually,
I've never heard somebody articulate it that way before, and I'm thinking on the fly here, but it reminds me a little bit of when mobile technology came out, and the places that mobile was adopted most quickly and most importantly were the places that were most behind, that did not have landline infrastructure, right? So you went to the developing world and mobile phones were completely transformative.
Exactly.
And so they were adopted very quickly. And the thing is about healthcare is it has always been shockingly slow to adopt technology and shockingly behind, right? It's incredible that we had to pay doctors to implement EMRs. What, do you keep these things in paper? And that even today, decision support is essentially non-existent in most specialties and certainly in primary care. And the tools that we take for granted in other industries, you would never run supply chains and manufacture things the way that doctors' offices
or
run.
just visit scheduling workflows.
Visit scheduling. It's astonishing, right? Because this is a field full of very, very smart, highly educated people, and yet the most sclerotic back ends. It's incredible. So I'm wondering if some of this isn't the need. AI is so much more valuable in healthcare than other places.
Yeah. I think that's totally right. I think that again, if it's a race to find these opportunities where AI is 10 to 100 times better, I mean, unfortunately, starting with a worse status quo does provide more of those, right?
Sure.
And I think the leapfrogging analogy is really apt, where in many ways, okay, so this might be one of the first industries to have ambient AI in every visit that's happening, or AI tools that are integrated into a bunch of data. There's lots of things you can build on top of that. And in many ways, it might actually position the industry to move far faster than other spaces where there's lots of verticals that they're still searching for what is the 10 to 100 times better use case. I mean, contrast that with finance, for example. I don't think anyone's found that yet.
It's interesting too. It's never occurred to me before, but part of this is scribing is the notion of scribing, basically taking notes on what just happened and making sense of it and using it is something that you want in every knowledge worker job. The difference is that in healthcare, you have to do it or you don't get paid. That I imagine if product managers pick a job. If you had to write,
I don't think any other job also requires you at the end of the day to write 3 hours of notes about what happened.
But the reason they have that requirement, right, is because without it you don't get paid.
Yeah, fair point.
So I suspect, as I was saying, if product managers had to keep notes in order to get paid in the same way that a physician does, that things like granola or right would be, which is a good business, would be as big a business as scribing, because everyone would
it's a great point.
Yeah.
You always follow the incentives.
So yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, speaking of scribing, I mean, one of your investments is in a company called Bridge, which, as best I can tell, is doing incredibly well. Clearly sort of the intersection of AI and health tech. And the thing about scribing is it's obvious. Like, it's an obvious idea. Like, LLMs talk pretty one day. Everybody knows doctors hated writing stuff down and they need to do this to get paid. And so there's this mad scramble to like own the scribing space, and concerns about like ultimately commoditization, race to the bottom, et cetera. So I'm curious, like, when you invested in a Bridge, like, what was the thesis on them versus any of the other many companies doing it? And how do you see sort of the maintenance of a moat over time in a space like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we invested in a Bridge, which originally was, I believe, February 2024, it was still very nascent as a space. And I think it was pretty obvious to me the space would happen, and that like in the next 2-3 years, every system would adopt these. And you basically hit a tipping point where it would become almost like crazy not to have one of these things. What initially drew me to the core Bridge product was they were super thoughtful on the kind of science side of it, right? I mean, you have Shiv Rao, the CEO, who's a physician and kind of deeply understands like all the physician edge cases and workflows and that part. But the CTO, Zach Lipton, is a AI professor over at Carnegie Mellon, and I think they've been really thoughtful on both like publishing a bunch of their research. At the time, a lot of that focus was around hallucinations, but also it's actually like a pretty difficult tech problem. I think to get like a 92% accurate scribe is not particularly difficult, but who wants 92% in healthcare? That's not going to work. And so I think getting, whether it's serving a bunch of different specialties or, finding a way to, mitigate hallucination or bias or things that happen in the models, I think it's important to, they were both leading on the science and then the actual performance of the product. And so I think it was a combination of feeling like that would give them the right to scale quickly, which Lord knows they've done and then some, and obviously have become the kind of dominant player in the space.
So if I distill this down, I think what I'm hearing is, like all great venture investments, at the end of the day, this was about the team.
Totally. I mean, the team is like out of this world amazing.
Yeah.
And then I think also, I always felt like, and Shiv actually says this, most eloquently, like everything in healthcare flows from the doctor-patient conversation. And so, God, like if you're in the doctor-patient conversation in real time, there's just so many things you can build on top of that. Like I've always said, that feels like a business you could build product on top of for like 50 to 100 years and never have a shortage of things to do. And I think, if anything, the hardest part for a Bridge as a business is just prioritizing, right? There's so many different things they can go do. But it's just such an interesting piece of real estate. And they've done an amazing job, becoming the kind of de facto solution in the space through, I think, this really superior product experience.
It's super interesting. And one of the questions I have, of course, is LLMs are extraordinary. And of course, we can do a lot of things with post-training in order to sort of get them specifically good at, say, taking notes in a primary care setting, in a hematology setting, in a genetic setting, what have you. But even still, they're probably not 6 nines reliable. So it probably takes you back a little bit to your time at Flatiron and like, where do we put humans in the loop, and how do we make this super efficient so that we have all the cost savings, but also as reliable as it needs to be, and ultimately get the reinforcement learning with human feedback that we want to improve all the nines, et cetera. Is that part of why you found them and they wanted to work with you? Was the Flatiron experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky to get the chance to work with the Bridge folks, and I certainly think it's a space I've been thinking about a lot. And I always joke that I invest in AI and I invest in healthcare, and usually they have nothing to do with each other. But every so often at the intersection, you get you get something really special. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of interesting analogs to or parallels to the Flatiron business, and so. It's been fun.
I do love the other point you made there, which I think is really interesting, is that the patient-physician experience, like people think of scribing as like, I got to put the notes down because, man, I don't get paid if I don't. And also, I got to have those notes so that I can refer to them 6 months from now, or my colleague can refer to them. I mean, they actually serve a really important purpose also. But that's all for the physician. There's never been any value in the scribing for the patient.
Yeah, which is so important, right? I mean, how many times have you, probably not you, but me, you go to a doctor visit and you like walk out and you're like, what did they say? Or like, what?
Well, right. And like, what should I be doing with follow-up? I'm lucky enough to be married to a physician. So I sort of, I outsource all that to my wife. But like,
exactly.
if you don't happen to have a spouse who's a doc, right. But there's so much richness in that for the patient. And it's really never been exploited before for the patient's benefit.
And that's what I think, I think you get these magical businesses in healthcare sometime where they're just like genuinely win-win-wins. And, I think at its best, Flatiron was that too. And I really do think a bridges that. It's such a benefit to the patient, such a benefit to the physician. And then ultimately, I think such a benefit to the broader ecosystem to find responsible ways to take that footprint.
I was thinking about that, actually. I heard you on your podcast interviewing the founders of Photon Health, which I don't think you're an investor. I don't think
I just like Otto's great.
Yeah, you're not an investor in them, but like just great founder, great company, and super interesting. And I think you made the point that with if Photon Health is an e-prescribing business, and the crux of the innovations, I think, boiled down to like patient empowerment, which people don't think about prescribing as something that is empowering to the patient, but it is if, like, among other things, I get to choose which pharmacy I go to, and I have an app that helps me manage my meds and manage interactions vis-a-vis those meds, and all these things that right now, again, we like count on the pharmacist or on the doctor to manage, as opposed to something that is where the patient is kind of the center of the healthcare universe. So I'm curious if you have any other specific examples of this, like patient empowerment in healthcare that you're seeing that's really interesting, or other sort of health tech theses, frankly, that you're pursuing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is a huge trend that will continue, and obviously, empowering patients to make decisions, arming them with information. Not to be a shameless VC and plug another portfolio company, but I'm on the board of this company, Garner Health, in the care navigation doctor quality space, and I think one really interesting thing about that product is helping patients. Nick, the CEO, is the former head of quant at Bridgewater, is super deep in everything quality algorithms. But I think part of what I love about what they do is they surface that information to patients to help them kind of make informed decisions about who are the highest quality doctors for whatever problem they have. And so I think across the board, you're seeing a lot of consumerization, which I think is a really positive thing.
So Garner, I thought was really interesting because I saw that in the portfolio, and I wasn't familiar with the company, and I went and took a look. And one of the things that struck me was like, I thought this was a solved problem. Do you like pre-AI? Do you know what I mean? Like, so Garner's like, I'm going to help you find a doctor, and it can be very difficult. Fragmentation in the U.S. healthcare ecosystem, and your specialist isn't necessarily associated with your primary care person, and most people don't even know who their primary care person is, anyways. And like, I've lived this. I mean, like, my wife literally is a doctor at Stanford. I live on the Stanford campus, and I still struggle to navigate the healthcare ecosystem. And for a while, I was with One Medical, but my specialists were at Stanford, and it was like super hard. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. But even still, I felt like can I find a doctor thing? Like, don't we have it? And so talk to me about like what wasn't solved and how you think maybe AI or their approach is sort of changing things.
Yeah. Well, I think, there are certainly, websites like ZocDoc or the ability to kind of find a physician. But I think finding the right physician and the highest quality physician for the issue that you're having, very unsolved problem, right? In many ways, it was a problem that couldn't have been solved until there was just a much more like data liquidity, right, and availability to really kind of analyze some of this stuff. And so I think, Garner's really been at the forefront of what does it mean to really deeply analyze physician quality, and I think as a result, have a product that is beloved. Back to these win-win-wins, it's a product that's beloved by consumers because everybody wants to, not just like the person that happens to be on ZocDoc, but like actually the right doctor to see for whatever condition I have, with like information on why that is. It ends up being a product that's beloved by employers because it turns out when you go to the doctors that are right for what you're doing, it does ultimately lower costs. And then also, a product that I just think makes a lot of sense for the ecosystem as a whole.
That's really interesting, and it's such a tough data problem. I will admit to a bias on that sort of particular front. I've always felt like sites, historically anyways, that would tell you like this doc has 4.5 stars. So it's like, you're like, so does that mean they're super friendly?
Exactly.
But not a good doctor?
This is why it's such an unsolved problem.
Or does that mean they don't actually take the hard cases? And
exactly.
So like, they cure everyone because they don't take, stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients. They will only take.
This is why you want the former quant head at Bridgewater solving this problem for you.
Yeah, no, I get it. Although I think there's there's two problems. One is to actually have the data and come up with the right answers. The second is to make consumers understand that that's actually the case, especially when there's like a decade or more of, I don't know, it's like Yelp reviews. Like they mean a little. They don't mean as much as they should. Anyways. But
I think in general, to your point, like I think we often underestimate what consumers are capable of in the healthcare space. Like I think we probably index so far in the other direction of like, hey, this stuff is so complex, people want to understand, we'll make these decisions for people. And I think hopefully, I'm starting to see the pendulums swing back, somewhat driven by AI, to, hey, if you arm people with the right information, like they can kind of understand some of these trade-offs that make these calls.
Well, there was a lot of paternalism in the ecosystem too. I mean, in the 1970s, sometimes they didn't tell people that they had cancer. I mean, the world has changed, and obviously, I think doctors in general are doing their best to navigate a very difficult thing of like, if I bombard you with too much information, like that's not useful, and I don't want to unnecessarily scare you, but I also don't want to like keep things from you. And like, it's actually a extremely nuanced thing that a physician has to do.
Yeah.
But it made more complicated. And now I can just take it and drop it in ChatGPT and asked,
which is probably going to force everything to change anyway, right? Because just given that, I think everyone will have to respond to that in some way, and I think it will, hopefully result in consumers being more empowered.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in the arc of time, like more data better than less data. And more informed consumers better than less informed consumers. And it is true that there are harms occasionally from like partial understanding of things, but I think it's outweighed by the sort of the data arc there, as it were.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, we haven't talked at all about mental health, and I'm curious if you have any theses about like where to play in the mental health space, and as AI meets mental health. I obviously have a biased opinion on this, of course, but I'm curious, as you look at the health tech ecosystem, and behavioral mental health is large. It's not nearly as large as say cardio or oncology, et cetera. And it has its challenges and its opportunities.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think the mental health space is incredibly exciting here. If I were to characterize, I think a lot of the last decade of investment and innovation in mental health has been really around access, which has been incredible, right? I mean, there was obviously huge barriers to access in the past, and still are. And so I think there's like that theme remains incredibly important. I think there's two areas where I'm really excited about the next frontiers of mental health. The first is around quality, and how do you kind of ensure that folks have a more consistent, high quality experience. I think people are probably underinvested there relative to just solving this broader access issue, which again, you kind of need the first to move on to the second. But I think that's a really exciting area. And then the second is just around scaling that access even further, right? Like ultimately, there are only so many therapists in the country. I think there's probably only so many people where genuinely there is an ROI from a financial perspective on providing weekly therapy. Yep. But I think it's something that most people will benefit from. And so I think I'm really excited about the potential of introducing AI to help really. I think we're in some senses shuffling a limited set of supply today, and how do you kind of expand and increase that?
100%. I mean, Jiminy, like the twin problems are efficacy and access, and want to address both and agree about this shuffling. I mean, the unkind analogy is sort of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic when you're like doing a better job of helping people to find a therapist when the real point is there's only 250,000 therapists and there are 60, 70, 80 million people who need access. There's just not nearly enough. And so you need more efficiency in the system. And the efficacy thing actually ties into the access piece too, because if we were better with providing care, more patients would graduate, right? I'm doing better. I no longer need a therapist. I no longer need these meds, et cetera. And that there's more sort of care in the system. We freed up a bed, as it were, for somebody who's either in a higher acuity situation who perhaps is going to need help for the rest of their lives, or for somebody who's experiencing garden variety anxiety, but like can't find a therapist today because they're already booked. We're with you on that one. We're bullish on where AI can help. Just switching gears again here. One of the things you've also talked about before, you want to invest in generational companies, and
that is the goal.
Yeah, but separating out sort of like the hype, et cetera. So what are your heuristics? Like, how do you do that?
I think that
I love asking somebody who's early career this question, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, like, if I had the perfect answer, I'd be retired.
You'd be Mike Moritz. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's definitely a few things beyond just metrics and things that you look at. I alluded to it earlier with the bridge, but I do think there's this question of, okay, especially in AI, there's a lot of stuff that has early traction. Does it feel like there's, 40, 50 years worth of stuff to build on top? And is the market so large and compelling and poised to change in such an interesting way that you really can evolve things? Because ultimately, for all these companies, it's like, the valuation of a company in 10 years is going to be determined by what people think the future of it is from there. And so I think there's lots of asking, hey, can it even get to the next act or the act beyond that? But I think when you take a step back on the generational company side, it's like, okay, yeah, let's assume it gets to Act 5. How interesting is that? Are people going to be excited about Acts 6 through 10? And, I think a lot of times, depending on how early the company is, it's not always evident. And sometimes you're just trusting an incredible founder in a market that seems like there's enough to do that they'll figure out what that is. And then sometimes you have more of a visceral gut sense that that just feels like such strategic real estate. If they're doing that, there's so much more to do down the line.
Yeah, I agree. And if I pull all this back into sort of a healthcare lens, like one of the things I think about, where are things just completely broken such that the opportunity, it feels almost limitless when you think about if this worked the way that it should. And we talked earlier about these notions of patient empowerment. If you had sort of the patient at the center of the way care was provided, somebody would have access to all of their data. They would have the ability to make choices in regards to spend. They would have all of the advice that in terms of thriving and prophylactic health, so that this was more about health as opposed to about disease. All of these things seem possible with some sort of combination of AI plus access to the right data, which you're at least theoretically guaranteed because of HIPAA. And I'm always interested in businesses that have struggled for a long time. And so investors have started to go away, because people on this patient data, patient empowerment thing, people have been talking about this for a long time, man. Eric Topol's been writing about it for a long time. And I love Eric, and he's been right for a decade or more, but investors get tired because I did this and it didn't work, and I did this and it didn't work. And I think as an entrepreneur or an investor, it can be okay, trough of despair. Okay, now is the time. And I do feel with AI, we're going to see some inflections on some of these things that
the crazy thing about AI is that it's not a consistent substrate, right? It's constantly getting better. And so actually those cycles are happening in really condensed periods where a year ago you would have been AI would never work in that space. It's not close, and it wasn't. And then you fast forward a year later and it's actually the models have gotten way better. And that use case actually is possible. And so it's
100%. It's actually very humbling. I'll tell you a funny story. I'm not sure I've ever shared this one publicly before, but when I was at Guardant Health in I don't know, this is 2016, 2017, people talk, we were an AI driven company back when that was
of course,
right, where it was all ML. But at the time, IBM Watson was telling everybody, we're going to read all the papers and then we're going to have answers. Somebody's just going to type in a question and then an answer is going to come back. And I
remember the whole Watson craze.
And and everybody was excited about it. And I remember telling people this is nuts. No, they're not. That's not how this works. And I felt fairly credible. I was saying this from the perch of a senior person inside one of the top ML health tech companies in the world at the time. And of course, I was completely wrong. Like I was right. I was right until I
You're
wasn't
right at the time.
I was right. I was right until the LLM moment. And it's a good lesson in humility. I mean, and I think
yes, it's like I feel like that. I mean, that's what's especially, and the AI wave is just like accelerating all of that. Where it's like I feel like you have to have these really strong opinions, but incredibly loosely held, because every 3-6 months the actual fact pattern changes.
Right. And it's interesting. I think it sorts ultimately for a certain kind of curiosity and humility. I'm not sure every investor has it.
And certainly on the builder side too, right? You got to just be constantly trying things out. And the thing you tried out 3 months ago that totally failed, actually, a new set of models might work.
Yep, absolutely. Terrific. Well, Jacob, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to close here with a question I have for everybody to finish up, which is on this podcast. We are focused on health tech, mental health, neurotech, and AI, and sort of the intersection thereof. One of the things I'm always looking for are recommendations for blogs or podcasts or shows or movies or books that you've really enjoyed, that are maybe thought-provoking, slightly off the beaten path, that relate in some way to this sort of neurotech, mental health, AI nexus.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I don't know how off the beaten path it is, but Nikhil Krishnan, who I host my healthcare podcast with Vital Signs, he runs this newsletter Out of Pocket, which I think has been for so many people like just an incredible introduction to the broader healthcare world. I mean, he explains really complex things in just a very fun way, and it's just such a unique style of writing. So I think he's truly just a phenomenal communicator, and I highly recommend that. And honestly,
out of pocket.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And he has a whole community around it, and yeah, that's great. Obviously, I wouldn't, I'd be remiss not to shamelessly plug my own AI podcast, Unsupervised Learning, where we do a fair amount of non-healthcare, but also healthcare. And then, I don't know. I think there's so much good content out there these days. I love like the Sid Mukherjee books, like Emperor of All Maladies, Gene. Like he's just like such a good writer, and so that might be 101 for some of your listeners. But I think the best folks are able to communicate like
I'm with you. Sid Mukherjee and Atul Gawande are sort of towering figures for me, and like the great books about medicine. I'm 100% with you. Those are great recommendations, and having listened to your podcast, it's terrific. People should check it out. Jacob, this was so much fun. Thanks so much.
Mark, this is a blast. Thank you so much for the time.